A Pale Morning, written by me. 'Twas a pale morning, with the moon's silvery face reflecting light colors on the roofs and streets of a quiet seaside town. From the hustle of footsteps, RG's men had already left their night shifts, for the marketplace and alleys were all empty. The chilling cold of autumn kept the fires burning within every household. Then, as the hour passed, a dim light rose from the sea horizon, replacing the night's colors with day. So, a new dawn has begun. A while later, long and bended shadows followed the first workers of the day. The barber, covered in his green coat and baggy pants, strided through the slope and cobbled streets, which cover the length of the town. Among the others were water collectors, stable workers, and a few night cats which have yet to leave the streets. But the gates have not opened for the villagers who travel to trade, or for the merchants who stuff their horses and baggage with goods for profit in the market. However, the air was not all quiet as a few townsmen had observed. The birds from the south, who never flew past the town, started an unexpected journey to the distant north days before, to a place which the bards sang as a cold wasteland no brighter than the underground dungeons in the south. The barber tried explaining the move as a form of habitat change in the birds' environment, that they would return in the winter. But other writers recounted as an ominous sign that fatal deeds were to fall upon either the town or the entire kingdom. Things were to happen as how the northern tribes besieged the town a decade before. During that siege, the governor had sentenced the members of the alleys to death. The decision, which the governor had painfully regretted ever since, showed a disaster never seen before. For months thereafter, nobody could visit the blood-soaked depths of the town, with its rotten bodies providing an unforgiving remembrance for those who were executed. But the chaos which ensued quickly undermined the troubles of the smells. Soon after the Northmen retreated, the internal rivals and swords began to point in every direction, and the beasts of every kind were let loose. In that time, any character, however small, could raise enough swords to disturb the peace of every other humble folk in town. Blood and violence broke between the rusty streets and walls. Clans of every kind formed, each more ambitious than the last. When word spread of the danger in town, that no traveler dared leave their rooms, and the villagers even more, no trade ever came back after the siege. The marketplace, which had once been full and busy, was an empty place now, filled with hornets and wasps. The fountain greenery, where the old and the young once played, now became the playground for treachery and killing. When resources in town became low from the violence, the anarchy which took place only became worse. In a matter of days, it had seemed as if the entire town had turned into banditry, a banditry which would have caught the lawless men of the wilderness dumbfounded. There was no aid. Not even the governor could control this town. When word reached that another Northman raid shall fall upon the town, the garrison force, which was still in control, left with the noble from the place, leaving it to burn from the torches and axes of the north. However, as the Northmen came closer and closer, the rage of those drunken beasts who slit at each other's throats quickly died down, and what happened next was widespread panic. Yet, it was in those times when the entire kingdom had begot the town, a young leader who had been aiding the defenseless in those dark and messy times stood up and rallied the townsfolk together again. Broken walls were repaired just as the killing finally ended. When the enemy did arrive, a brutal siege plagued the town for a second time, but the character and bravery of this leader brought his countrymen to repel and drive their enemies off. At last, the siege was over, and the governor, who had left the city in ruins, returned to continue his governance for the kingdom. And so, a new leader was born, back in the alleys, protecting the common folks as before. His reputation was now widely known even outside of town, and his name was Argy. As the day progressed onwards, the bustle of morning began. From the marketplace came the sound of stalls being set, and conversations by trader to trader. Yet, in a particular corner of town lay an inn, which had not brought the usual raucous laughter of travelers and drinkers. The only sign of occupancy was the trail of massive footprints which led to the door. Within the inn sat 30 mail-clattered men, their faces reflecting a lifetime of hunting and blood. Though the tables were full of drinks, the soldiers were sober as they drank. Along the bar stools sat the captain of them all, his body overlooking the entire bar and his trimmed face showing scars and bruises. On the opposite end, however, stood a wrinkled old man and a young, as the inn gave a shudder. Soon, the keeper was confused and worried. He nodded quickly and paced to the cupboards. But the wrinkled man, who hadn't said a word till now, walked to the desk and returned the gaze at the captain. "Then I think you're wrong," he said. The captain's eyes twitched and moved. "Everyone knows how lawless you are. And I have been on both occasions when your tribe invaded us. Twice. You were defeated, but not by the king, but by the alley leader, Argy. Another bandit. Those who are hunted everywhere by our men. You may be the keepers of peace in the wilderness, but here the only stability is from Argy. Even if he murders and hangs, there has never since been a case of mass prejudice or crime here." "You are an old fool, just like the rest of them," the captain snarled once more. Then he bashed his drink on the floor. Pieces of clay instantly broke and shattered. "And there's more drinks here, Captain," a voice came from behind. The keeper, who hadn't dared speak until now, handed the captain a new cup of mead and then left to pick the fallen pieces of clay by the bar. "You shouldn't break good cups like that," the wrinkled man frowned. In an instant, the captain flung his battle axe from the straps and threw it at the floor. Suddenly, it seemed like the world had frozen for a moment, as the winds gave a hollow whisper to the air. The wrinkled man covered his mouth as fresh stricken blood poured across the tavern floor. You murderer!" he shouted, but it was too late. The captain looked at the ground. Its blade had gone too deep in the keeper's back to be saved. As he looked on, the leather vest seemed to tighten itself around its owner, as if to save him from bleeding any further. From the corner of his ear, he could hear the sweet voice which continued to hum the last joyful moments of the innkeeper. The captain looked down. Somehow, he could sense the danger of Argy and his men waiting for revenge on his band of mercenaries. It was too late now. The argument with that wrinkled man had invoked the violent nature of killing, and more blood must be shed. He looked up to the old man in ghastly shock and said a painful sentence to say. "Now I have done it. More must be done." With that, he turned, and his soldiers listened, holding their sword hilts as they silently left the tavern and its dead keeper. By noon, the old man had traversed every street and alley, frantically searching for Argy's men. From the townsfolk he had gathered that he had gone to celebrate the arrival of an important merchant, with little guards around. As he raced for the location, shadows followed him across the road, as if the dead were after him, as if another chaos was round the corner. In that afternoon, the news of a catastrophe flew across town, for Argy had been found dead with the merchant. The wrinkled man, unable to bear it longer, took a horse and left the town. From then on, every household door turned shut, as the market became desolate and plain. The usual sound of musicians and joyful scenes of dancers were gone in an instant, as if the entire town had been got of plague. Just a day later, a big scruffy man sat by a spinning wheel outside in the cold open air. His face was pale and unmoved. It was sorrowful to say that the once jolly barber had left the world with an opening in his head. The death of Argies had whispered the end of the barber, who had been targeted by a minor merchant for suspected depth long before. Now he sat there, alone in the cold, looking as the day went by. A while later, a band of horsemen left the gates, armored from head to toe, their helmets drenched in blood. As they rode, the foremost rider turned back towards the barber with his two narrow eyes. But he couldn't look at the man for long, and soon he pressed his head on the horse's neck and rode away like the swift wind, never to be seen again.